Good evening and welcome to DidsburyFM. This is the November episode of DidsburyFM. We've got some great speakers for you this evening, starting with Ben Saunders, who is an author. Hello, Ben.
Hi there.
Before we get going, I wanted to say that it was Remembrance Sunday, and Remembrance Sunday, and so we won't do a 2-minute pause, a 2-minute silence, but we've already done that today. We'd like to remember all those who lost their lives and indeed our shared history. We don't have a raffle tonight, but we will do it our Christmas special, and there's a lot to talk about, so I'd quite like to crack on. So, Ben Saunders, welcome.
Hi there.
Ben, I want to start from sort of a bit of an introduction about you. You're an author of a book called Senescence.
Senescence.
Senescence, forgive me.
I suppose that's one of the issues with writing the book title. You probably should do one that people can spell and B pronounce, but at least it's got a subtitle, The Ashes of Youth, as well.
Oh, yes.
I'll explain what Senescence is later.
Okay, well that looks like a tree from Didsbury Park, so I love that it fits in with us. But just before we talk about the book, I wanted to really find out a bit about you and how it is that you've come to write your first book, which is published by T-Rex, and how that all came about. So you're a dad of 2 who live in Didsbury, and you're married. And what made you decide to write a book?
Well, long and short of it is that I work in consultancy, and you do one job and then it finishes after 6 months and there's another, etc., etc. I've just finished a big job doing a big government back office department over in Swansea and another one in Nottingham, and I joined another firm with the hope of some work at me. It didn't kind of work out, and I had a bit of a tying clause, so I found myself not really being able to do another job because I was sort of tied in, not really doing any income, getting any income. So it was a bit of a strange situation. When you're a bit younger, if you've got kind of three months to burn, you'd probably go, right, get me on the next plane, I'm going to Australia or something or other. But as you mentioned, I'm married and have children, so I don't think that would have gone down very well.
No, not the school run.
No, it makes it harder to do the school run. So I found myself not really being able to leave Manchester and Didsbury at the same time, not being able to work and then not being able to do stuff. And I was thinking, well, what do I do with myself? And I was watching a show called Air Hunters, which is on the BBC. And it's a show where people who pass away and don't have a will, and then people do a bit of research on them and then see if they can find any distant, long-lost relatives who didn't know this person, and then they can tell them that they've got an inheritance. I was watching one episode of this that particular morning, as fate would have it, and I can't remember the name of the author, but basically this individual had died. They didn't have any immediate family, and they'd written a book, and so the show, when they were researching them, went, oh, this individual had written a book, and there was stuff about the book, and then they found some long lost relatives and gave them a couple of £100,000 or whatever that was in their will, and were very happy. But what they said was they were really upset that they never got to know this individual, that they didn't know them. And but the one good thing was they had this book, so they read the book and they thought they got to know the individual a bit better from it, which sort of got me thinking a bit. If I pass away or whatever, and there might be grandchildren in the future, great-grandchildren, hopefully grandchildren will know me if I have them. But if they've got relatives in the future, how will they know anything about me apart from what's on my gravestone and that sort of thing? So I thought, why don't I write a novel? And I've been thinking about it for a while. So there's the odd idea that's been bouncing in my mind, but I'm probably not the only person to have thought that. But you never really do it, though. That's the thing. So you have a couple of thoughts about it, and you sort of think about it. It's one thing to do it.
Yeah.
And so, but this sort of spurred me on, and I thought, well, there's another thing as well called, I think it's, I can't remember the name of it. There's a novel writing thing where you try and write a short story novel in a month in November. And I'd read about that, and it wasn't November, I think it was after that point, but I thought, well, if people can give it a crack in a month, maybe I can too, if I do it full time, so I have a bit of spare time. So off I went, and that's basically how I started. And I had a few ideas bubbling around, and then I started to. I didn't immediately start writing it. That's the first thing. The first thing I did, I went to Didsbury Library and wandered around and looked at different writing styles from different authors, Steinbeck or the great Hemingway, and thought.
Well, Hemingway is very short and straight to the point. I always choose him for our book club.
Yeah, so basically I like Hemingway.
Yeah.
I've been to the Hemingway house in Key West and.
Oh, you're a proper fan.
Yeah, so I'd look at those sort of authors and try to find a style of writing that fitted. So did a bit of research on writing styles, things like that. So that's how I started it, basically.
Just so we can give a shout out to Didsbury Library, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Do they have a large section on these?
The advantage to go into a physical library is it's very easy to just sort of wander around, pick up an author and read 20 pages and get the feel of their writing style. And writing styles can be. It's only when you start writing a book do you realise that there seems to be there's a million and one ways of writing a book effectively, and you've got to figure out how to do it, and it can be a bit bewildering about how you're going to go about it.
So that was my next question. So you've told us why it was you wanted to write, then researched writing, and then you started writing.
Yeah, so after a couple of weeks actually of researching how am I going to do this, what would be my writing style, then I sort of started to come up with a plot synopsis.
And how did you do that?
So again, you can write a book in a number of different ways. I think Jack Kerouac, I think he wrote one of his novels in the space of 48 hours without sleep. He did the whole thing in one go. So there are a number of ways you can write a novel. I wouldn't recommend that, by the way, if anyone's going to try. So I approached it, what are my skill sets? How do I know how to do things? Well, I'm a project manager, I'm qualified to do that. So I sort of treated it as a project and thought, well, writing a novel, the idea was to write 80,000 word novel. It seems overwhelming. You're staring at a blank word processor and going, right, now what do I do? And that's an overwhelming task. So the way you take an overwhelming task is to break it into smaller problems and deal with them. So I basically tackled it chapter at a time and came up with a synopsis of what chapter 1 was going to be, what chapter 2 was going to be, what chapter 3 was going to be, roughly, and thought at least 10 chapters, 5-10 chapters ahead. Had to think about that, and then off I went.
So now, I've got the copy of the book, which I'm reading, I haven't finished it. Everyone's got a copy in front of them. We won't sort of dissect you in due course. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was about the characters in the book. How did you come up with that? And did you have sort of annoying people that you could then kill off? If you've got a neighbour, no one of your neighbours is neighbours. We had an author. One of my neighbours is there who I would never kill off. I've not written fiction. I've always written non-fiction.
Yeah.
But I can think of some of our neighbours that would kill off. But we've had an author here before who, she gets her characters from people she knows, sees, houses that she's seeing. What would be going on there? She imagines it. So what was the inspiration for some of the characters in your book?
Well, firstly, not every book is character driven. It's another way of writing a book, but this one is. So it's a perfectly good question. So the characters, the book itself is basically describe it as a book about life and death. That topic is life and death, weirdly. So it's both those things. The reason for the characters, there's 5 main characters in it, but they're all different ages. You read a lot about kind of Generation X and Generation Y and Boomers and Millennials, and everyone's falling out with each other. And people don't necessarily understand the perspective of the other person. So I very much wanted it to be a book that wasn't one main character. I wanted it to be same with movies. I always prefer movies where you don't just have a good guy and a bad guy. You've got an explanation of why is the bad guy like the bad guy? What happened to them? Why so they're not just two-dimensional characters. So all of these characters, these 5 characters, there's actually 7. The book ended at either side by a younger and older character. Effectively, it's like the 7 ages of man is what I wanted to do. So each of the characters represents one of those characters in Shakespeare's sonnet, effectively. So you've got a baby in there, but that's the book-ended one. But then you've also got the young student. You've got the main character Helen, who's in there. You've got the older, sort of more established character, the journalist. You've then got the person right at the top of their game. Then someone in their 50s who's running a pharmaceutical company, the multi-millionaire type person. Then you've got someone right at the end of their career as well, who works for civil service. And then finally, there's a very, very old individual that pops up in the book as well. But it's those characters, their perspectives, and how that differs, say, if you're 20 or 70, about something remarkable that happens.
So, in a nutshell, don't tell us the ending of the book.
No.
What is the book about? And then I want to ask you about the title and then publishing.
So the book, as I said, it's a book about life and death. So you say on the back, it's.
But is it really depressing?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm a secret.
I've already read about 10 pages.
I'm a secret optimist. So as it says on the back, it's what happens if you discover something that changes absolutely everything. So it's taking unremarkable or normal everyday people, but throwing something completely unusual in there. There was an author called John Wyndham who wrote Day of the Triffids and various other things. He does that quite a lot. So there's a touch of sci-fi in it, but only in the sense of there's a remarkable discovery, and it's how people react to it